Hey y'all, in this video, Chief Vernon Ward is going to be talking about his time in special operations in Mogadishu leading up to the events of the more well-known Black Hawk Down mission. Really interesting insight into him working with Spectre gunships, going after targets, doing shaping operations, and generally supporting the UN mission there. And then following that, he's going to talk about his time in Bosnia, and then we talk a little bit about the evolution of special operations. Really, really cool to talk to him on this stuff. Again, we really appreciate it, and hope you enjoy. Thanks for watching. So what other aircraft are you working with? Are you working with A-10s, F-15s, or what kind of?
Whenever we would integrate specifically for specific exercises, for example, prior to the onset of the Bosnian operation, as it turns out, my brother was the SF Sergeant Major, the so-called Sergeant Major at the Corps in Europe, and
Wow.
they were starting to get taskings in support of Bosnia. And he calls me one day and he says, I've got all these FIST of the fire support teams and he said, I've got all these FIST in this Corps that have never even directed damn air support. He said, they in the NATO TACPs, we all know, that sometimes they are much less than proficient. So we basically set it up and we flew the FIST from Europe to Hurlburt, and I put them through about a 3-week train up with not only gunships and rotary wing air support, but anyway, we did a train up with them, working with the with all the soft aircraft. We incorporated some A-10s and stuff and gave them a little bit of a coordination exercise where they could understand that you can have more than one type of airplane engaging at once. And so then we sent them back and we started working again with 10th Group for them to get ready to go play in Bosnia.
So how did the role of like FACs and JTACs kind of evolve through all this? Because I know we talked offline, not on any of the podcasts, about when FAC aircraft stopped being used. Can you describe kind of how that evolved through time up until the 90s?
Having experience trying to fight a fight and control TAC air in MACV SOG, I kind of knew that you get kind of task saturated. And
no kidding, yeah.
General Tony, at that time, Colonel Tony, had just taken over 10th Group. Well, he calls me and he says, I'm coming down. I want, to meet all those commanders there. And I said, okay. And he said, I also want to talk about our latest tasking, which was obviously Bosnia. And when he got down, I took him over to the CCT guys and I introduced him there and sat both of them down in place and said, look, this can be a mutually supporting operation. I said to Tony, I said, we can just about treble your comms if you take a TACP. I said, and the mission at that time, the op plan that was in vogue at the time was 10 A-teams were going to occupy 10 airfields in Bosnia and the surrounding areas. And they were going to provide security for those airfields and maintain them as operational, which was BS. Yeah. How's an A-team going to secure an airfield? But that's what the dreamers in the Pentagon had come up with. And I said, then you've got your own air traffic controller with you because you don't have anybody on that team who's going to know how to control the aircraft. So that's your CCT guy. And I said that PJ can help with your medics with triage, because if you actually go in there, there's going to be a need for mass casualty triage. So he's going to basically double, or at least experience wise, your triage capability and take some of the load off your medics. And he also is going to have a certain amount of comm. So I said the perfect thing would be for us to take a CCT guy and a PJ and attach them to each team. And then we told the CCT commander, said, but the caveat is those guys have got to go to Fort Devens right now and embed with those teams. And they're going to be there throughout the entire operation. Well, they both thought that was the greatest thing since sliced bread, and it happened. And from that point on, that's been the SOP for all the ops we've done, is we embed that CCT guy in there with teams. It's spread to the SEALs. It's gone to everybody. And the whole point of that was to try to take some of the I won't say the difficulty, but it is difficult for that team leader to be able to fight a fight and control all that air. And, you know, there's only so much you can do in a fight. You know, situational awareness starts to get diverted from this to that, and there's a chance you might screw something up in the interim. So that solved that problem. And that initiated and started this whole thing about this attaching those elements to an A team or to a SEAL platoon. And that's how it started.
How cool.
And Tony was a guy who agreed to do it.
All right. Yeah, I suppose it combines the aspects of your Covey rider and your front seater in a Bronco or something like that. Just puts them on the ground with the guys. And at the time, I suppose that wasn't so much need for the slow moving FAC aircraft. So you just put all that on the ground. It makes total sense.
Yep. Well, now that team leader can look at that CCT guy and say, I want something over there now.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the CCT guy's worth of crap. He already knew that, and he's already got it on the way.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I was going to comment on that. You know, when you've got a team on the ground and they're really they've learned to gel together, because that's what makes an A team what it is.
Right.
So they've all got their role. They're all fighting the fight. They're all doing the different things they need to do. And the team lead generally shouldn't have to say very much or do very much, because everybody's just getting on with the job, right? And so if that guy is embedded with them and he can do that too, he's going to fit right in.
Yep. And that was the whole, that was the whole point of everything, was making sure they understood these two guys have to go live with these teams. And they stay with them because they have to be versed in the SOPs. They have to be versed in the IEDs. They have to know everything that team knows about the way they're going to operate in the field. Those guys have to know. And when they're not being used as what their job is, they just become another gun in line.
Makes sense. Rob, you want to go on to Mogadishu?
Yeah, I'd love to. Yeah. So, Chief, let's move to Somalia. So, what year were you first deployed to Somalia?
June of 1993.
And
that was within 24 hours after the Adid forces ambushed the UN convoy and killed the 23 Pakis. We were on the way. We flew nonstop from Hurlburt to Djibouti, and then Colonel Connors, who was the the gunship commander and I flew into to Mogadishu to link up with the UN and start getting the targets and the ROE.
Okay, and so what was the sort of mood like in the unit there? Were you feeling quite aggressive to go and get payback, or was it more just get set up and establish security?
You talking about for us?
Yeah,
For my element?
yeah.
Basically, I had the guys out of my liaison office there. I had 3 SF NCOs and a Navy SEAL and a couple of Air Force guys. But our after Colonel Connors and I met with the UN, then I linked up. There was a 5th group element on the ground in Mogadishu. I linked up with them and coordinated going down to the airport in Mogadishu to pick up all of my guys who were flying in. And we picked them up and we moved back to the old U.S. Embassy compound, which was pretty much devastated. I mean, the structure we were in had a massive hole in the tin roof, but that's where we set up. And shortly after that, we had a couple of CCT guys who came in, and they had comm, and we set up a comm center, and there were in that area there were several different nationalities. There was a New Zealand group. There was a French group. There were several of them right around. So we kind of were in a little area, not all together, but close to each other. And then we started trying to get ready, because we got there and we had one night on the ground, and the next night we did the first 5 pre-plans.
I'm sorry, what was that? What does that entail?
The pre-plans?
Mm-hmm.
The pre-plan targets that the UN had asked for the first night. We had the Adid radio station, the transmitters, the Adid transmission tower, Otto's garage. Osman Otto was his deputy and partner in the construction business, the only construction business in Somalia. And they had an enclave that they had, obviously, their houses, but they had big workshops. And he was the primary workshop for converting Toyotas into technicals, where they would come in and reinforce the beds and then mount crew serve weapons on them. Now we hit that the first night. We hit the transmitter, the transmission tower, and 2 AW authorized weapons storage sites, which we nicknamed the cigarette factory. But they were places that were authorized for them to store weapons. And we took those out that first night.
Okay, so it sounds like you were trying to sort of, cut their comms, get rid of their weapons, destroy their technical factory. What was next in terms of
next night we hit the Adid enclave, and it was right down the block from where Osman Otto's was. And that night when I sparkled the first before the first round, they put a 40 down and then a 105 right behind it. And when the 105 went off, that's when we had this massive secondary with a massive fireball. Obviously, it had a lot of POL in it, and it lit up the entire skyline.
I'm guessing he wasn't home due to the fact that he was still around.
Well, now this was actually the garage area was right across the street from his actual compound where he lived. But I was about 250 to 300 meters from that enclave.
And did you get a suntan from the amount
Now
of
we
heat?
could feel that some of the heat, but we didn't get any. We didn't get any kind of flash burns or anything.
Okay, and when you're calling those missions, what is it? You just had the one aircraft with that's providing the fire support?
Well, normally there would be one aircraft coming overhead and one aircraft would be in transit. The problem was this was during the Clinton administration, and their lack of understanding of military operations was unbelievable. We flew nonstop, AR'd all the way there. And then we couldn't get tanker support for the gunships, and they were having to fly out of Djibouti. So there's no tanker support. So they would fly a mission, shoot up everything, land at Mogadishu airfield, take on fuel, and then take off and fly back to Djibouti. So at any given time, we would have one overhead and one coming, or one on the ground refueling and one overhead.
Was there a concern for the safety of those aircraft because they could be taken out by a manpad when they're coming into land at Mog?
Well, they could have been taken out any time during the mission, but the UN was completely worthless for us, because the first meeting I asked about the 106s, and they kept telling me there were no 106s, and I said, well, I know they're 106s because one of my sister elements was in here in 85, and they actually trained them on the 106. So, and later during our tenure there, when we participated in the big joint UN attack on the enclave, the 106s came into play that morning, the ones that didn't exist.
And that's a recoilless rifle, just for the audience.
Right.
Yeah.
An extremely effective weapon.
And would the concern be there that they could be mounted on a technical and used against an aircraft that's just taking off?
Not as likely to hit that, but a vehicle of some kind, short of an M1 Abram, the 106 will devastate. And that's exactly what happened. They hit the lead vehicle of the Moroccan Armored Brigade with a 106 that morning.
Right. Okay.
Boy.
So when that happened, is that when you kind of get activated to bring aircraft overhead and support?
They wouldn't let us. They wouldn't let us have 105 in the gunships overhead for that attack. They would not let us use the 10th Mountain Division Cobras for air support during that attack. They were convinced that they were going to just roll through everything. And as it turned out, at one point, the fifth group element that was there did have a Mark 19. And that Mark 19 was employed advantageously that morning to help break some of the gridlock.
Did if the fifth group elements there, did they not have their own access to Cobras and other things that they could call in if they were?
Not really. It was the UN is just not set up to have any type of combatant command. They were only there to draw the money. And my understanding is the actual command element was an Italian general, was actually in contact with the D throughout this entire operation.
Damn.
So it sort of seems a bit odd that they wouldn't even have a plan B, which is, we'll get Chief Ward on and get the gunships in if we need them, if there's an emergency. They didn't even have that as a backup.
I had my guys out with each one of those elements that were in that, and I had a QRF. And to be perfectly honest with you, we had a P3 overhead, and we tracked the deed the entire day. We knew exactly where he was the entire time, and they never would clear us to launch. I mean, they, like I said, later it was learned that there was a little bit of a corruption factor there with the UN command and Adid. So
with the intercepts you're doing, I guess you can pinpoint his location, and you could have had Cobras just putting a hellfire through his window.
We could have, I actually watched him come out of his house and get into his car one night, and could not get permission from the powers that be at the time to engage him.
So when you're looking at that time, is that on a TV screen, or is that on a projector, or how are you seeing that?
Am I seeing him?
Yeah.
Because I was about 175 yards from him.
Okay, got it.
Building, looking.
You're literally following him. Got it.
Literally with NVGs watching him walk from his house to his vehicle.
Holy shit, that's crazy. Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to diminish that at all.
On TACSAT, we were begging for permission. I also had a guy, one of the 5th group guys with me with a Barrett. And we could not get permission.
That would have taken care of it quite quickly.
Yep.
Man. Yeah, that's got to be just...
problems.
I can't imagine how frustrating that would be.
But you have to look at the command, or the lack of command, that was in charge at the time. So
yeah, and we should clarify for the audience too. All this that Chief is talking about, this happened all before the famous Black Hawk Down Battle of Mogadishu incident. These guys could have
none of that ever occurred had they just let us do what we would have been able to do.
Yeah. That's bureaucracy, and I guess in international politics and military
this
operations.
We were denied permission from our people.
Okay.
So in terms of the command and control structure, Chief, on the ground, you've got the UN, and then I guess you've got State Department and the agency, and you've got SOCOM. So you've got all of these different organizations.
General Tangney was the SOC commander. He actually came in and stayed with us for about 3 days. He actually got to go up and watch one of the operations, and he was trying to get clarification from the powers that be on why and what the ROE was, and why it was so restrictive toward the individual himself, and he never got an answer either.
So there's probably some politics going on between the UN and state or something like that.
Well, the problem, this was not long after we had a new president installed. If you remember, that was one of Clinton's first foreign policy decisions. There was a lot of ineptitude in the command group.
So
if I remember rightly, the agency was running a bunch of militias and trying to sort of, pacify Somalia at the time, and Adid was kind of resisting that. Is that where he comes into the picture?
Now, what happened was, under Bush, they had all the UN, the humanitarian aid going in because they were in the middle of a massive famine, and all the food and stuff was going in. Remember, the SEALs came wading ashore with their do-rags, and they got in all kinds of trouble over that. And the thing that caused that was there was a food convoy. And if you control the food, you basically control the populace. And Adid ambushed the convoy. And he had crowds mass up around all of these trucks in this convoy and stop the convoy. And he had shooters in the crowd that were able to get right up to the trucks and shoot the Paki soldiers at point blank range. And the entire thing was all predicated on food.
Right. Okay. So he kind of thrown his hat in the ring to take control of the food supplies and I guess the neighborhoods of
the whole thing is just it's a warlord dominated society. And at the time, he and Otto were the two who were the most powerful. And in a way, it was better there because you knew exactly who was doing what. But when you have competing warlords, you don't really know who's going to do what. So sometimes it's better just to have one strong one than multiple weaker ones.
So you were running gunships over Mogadishu. How come after you rotated out and then the Battle of Mogadishu happened, how come they didn't have gunships?
Because they had asked for, remember, that's think about who the commander-in-chief was at the time, okay, and who he had appointed to be in that defense hierarchy. When those people came in to Mogadishu, then to quote secure the objective, they had asked for gunships, and they were denied by that hierarchy.
Yeah, I think you were saying they also had no Cobras, and the only gunships they had were the AH-6s and the Black ones.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
So the biggest ordnance they've got is 7.62.
Pretty much. There were so many things that happened that never should have happened, and all of which could have been prevented. I mean, it's just, in retrospect, we lost a lot of people completely unnecessarily, all because of the ineptitude of some who were in positions of power that had no business making those types of decisions.
I suppose it's a testament to the guys on the ground for going in and doing those missions without adequate air support.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like I said, you got those that do and those that make things happen and those that watch things happen. And some people just wonder what the hell happened. So,
Chief, I think we got about 10 minutes left before you got to take off. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Rob, is it okay if I go on to the next section?
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, Chief, we don't have too much time, but I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your time working with personnel recovery over in Bosnia, and if you could describe the difference between PR and combat search and rescue. That was one of the interesting distinctions you made for us before.
Okay. The two probably most misused terms in the military are PR and CSAR. CSAR is combat search and rescue. At one point, we used to say that's a service responsibility. So, if the Army loses somebody, you go get them. If the Air Force does, they go get them. But we have dedicated CSAR assets. We have CSAR assets in peacetime. You go to Alaska and the Air Force and the Coast Guard fly SAR all the time. It's just not combat. That implies that you're going to have probably a couple of PJs on board a helicopter. And they're going to go in and just pick someone up off the ground and come back out. Personnel recovery is a much, much more complex operation. And it is set up to where the ground force commander is in command. In a CSAR, the first element on scene is in command. That means if we got a lieutenant flying an F-16, the first guy over the crash site, he's in charge. Now, the problems arise if you have a ground force commander in charge. He may not want that area compromised by expending ordnance around that area before he gets there. And that would be his call. Whereas otherwise, it's just that lieutenant flying that F-16 in circles overhead. And that's the first problem that arises, is the chain of command. The second problem is that ground force is going to provide security for a recovery element. And it may involve the PJs. It normally does. There's a PJ element attached with that. If you remember, when we talked about earlier, the linking and joining of the CCT and the PJs with that team.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're going to have a team on an aircraft. They'll secure the area, but the PJ and the CCT guy are gonna establish contact and do the authentication, the initial authentication of that whoever it is you're recovering. And a PR does not have to be a down pilot, whereas a CSAR is going to be a recovery 99 times out of 100 of a down pilot. But personnel recovery could be an E&E guy, a guy who's in an invasion net. It could be any number of things. So the entire concept is different. The entire planning is different. And the execution is completely different. So when I came back out of Somalia, I was actually at Fort Bragg with the CG debriefing with him when another call came in to deploy to Bosnia. Not to Bosnia, but in support of Bosnia.
To Brindisi, right?
To Brindisi. And once there, then I was making sure that we had the SF elements linked and that their Air Force counterparts linked, and that the training going between them, the 53s, and the gunships was actually taking place. And then I was tasked to actually train the NATO TACPs to use soft aviation and close air support. So that's when I got involved with that other part of it. But one of those teams actually was a team that went in that picked up the F-117 pilot that was shot down, who later became Chief of Staff of the Air Force.
Wow. So what would that look like?
The PJs grabbed him, but they had a security element with them.
So they have to go in, insert guys on, I'm guessing on 53s, and secure the area, then have the PJs come in and verify.
Not like a staged operation. It's simultaneous.
Yeah.
When that aircraft touches down, guys are off the aircraft, guys have made contact. As soon as they do the initial authentication, and the initial triage, they're back on that aircraft and hopefully you're on and off the ground in less than 30 seconds.
Wow. Man, so that's got to be something you train for over and over just to have it down. And
my last deployment into Kuwait, we spent 6 months in Kuwait with the PR mission out of Ali Salim with teams out of 5th Group and with AFSOC and with the Australian SAS.
Got it. So I was hoping, Chief, that we're probably going to have to close pretty quick here because we only got 5 minutes, but you shared with us some of your thoughts on the way that special operations has evolved now and how it's gotten away from maybe its roots in being an unconventional force. You talked about the amount of people that are on an objective and different stuff like that. Would you like to close with your thoughts on that?
There are certain tenets that are basic rules of soft that I think have been kind of stomped over here in the last 20 or 30 years. The fact that special forces is an economy of force operation. Okay, we we're supposed to be a force multiplier. We always need to put minimal people in danger on the objective. You minimize the exposure on the objective, because if you've got say a 6-man team and you lose someone, you've lost half your team, because anybody that gets hit takes 2 other guys now away in order to take care of that guy that's hit. So half your team is now gone. So you minimize the exposure on the objective area. You don't overwhelm with unstoppable force. You hit the objective with some forethought and do it with a minimal amount of people who can get hit. And they've lost sight of that. Some of our more publicized elements have definitely lost sight of that. It's more like we're going to bludgeon you to death. And that's not the point of SOG. That's the infantry's job. But things like the economy of force, the fact that the guy who wins the firefight in any fight is the guy who maintains C2. It's to me, it always was. It's much easier for me to control my team against a company in combat, because that other guy's having to control 100 and something people, and I'm only having to control my team. So whatever I do is going to be much more responsive and much more reactive than he can do. So my chances of getting out of that's the way we always looked at it in SOG is, the smaller the element, the better chance you have, because he's trying to control a whole bunch of people, and he's got more chaos and confusion and fog of war than I have. So they've lost sight, I think, of that. Part of it was because of the nature of the mission over the last 20-something years with the global war on terror. Now they're nothing more than glorified door kickers. Well, shit, cops do that every day. We don't need a specially trained force just to kick doors whenever that's a very commonplace operation anymore. But we need people who can think and think outside the box and actually conduct unconventional warfare.
Got it.
Unconventional warfare, when you think about it, entails every aspect of war, from psychological to logistical to intelligence. All of that is involved in the UW.
I think you can see the results of that in the first 4 weeks on the ground in Afghanistan. Like I alluded to earlier, you got teams going in there and literally, buying the Northern Alliance loyalty and then kicking the crap out of the Taliban, freeing Kabul, pushing bin Laden onto the Pakistani border, and locking him in. All of that happened in 4 weeks flat. And that was all done with unconventional warfare. And then, of course, after that, you've got 20 years of big army rolling in. And
well, if they actually, if you look at the first 16 weeks of the war, Special Forces guys had basically accomplished every objective that had been laid out to that war. And the war was won. And for the first time, there was some semblance of a centralized element of leadership that was actually being accepted by all the tribal factions. And then when the conventional forces come in, everybody's got to have their OER bullet, and they just screwed it up because then they decided they were going to nation build, and you can't nation build in a place that's been dominated, by tribal warfare for its entire existence. So democracy doesn't work there. All those things that they throw up on their bullet slides, they don't work. SF had won the war, and if they had left it alone, Afghanistan would be still what it was then. And we wouldn't have the Taliban in charge.
Yeah, it's such a good perspective.
It's a great point to close as well. And I just want to say thank you, Chief, for taking the time to talk with us and to record a little detail on special operations history. I know I've been fascinated to hear everything you have to say, and the depth of technical knowledge that you're sharing, and operations, and a lot of guys, out there with their asses on the line, and having somebody like you in support of them, would have been something that kept them alive. So, we have to thank you for that, and the nation does too.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to chat with you, and anytime.
Thanks so much, Chief.
Cool.
Anytime.
If you enjoy our videos, please like and subscribe to stay up to date with our upcoming releases. Additionally, if you love SOG Prairie Fire, consider supporting us on Patreon to help us continue releasing top quality content through our new mod, SOG Nickel Steel. Links in the comments.